Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. Our main event, the city's broadband effort, the difference between having Wi-Fi and having a connection that holds up under normal use, and what a plan like this means for food deserts and investment in neighborhoods. Top of the podcast, the Shelby County Commission is done with the heavy lifting in its budget season, approving a 1-cent property tax rate hike, $3.45 to $3.46, after rejecting a proposed 24-cent hike that drew only 4 yes votes. The 1-cent tax hike had just the 7 votes needed to pass, although Commissioner Reginald Milton's after the gavel vote on this sent everyone to the Commission's rules of procedure, and Milton's late vote was the 7th vote. Ultimately, Milton moved to suspend the rules and have his late 7th vote counted. That motion needed 2/3 to pass, which would normally be 9 votes on the 13-member commission. But 2 commissioners abstained on the motion to suspend. Now, by another part of the commission rules, it is a 2/3 majority of those present and voting that is required. The 2 passes are considered commissioners not voting by the rules, making the 2/3 majority 8 votes, and that's just how many votes there were. A final vote at the June 21st commission meeting because a tax hike requires public notice. The votes on this not likely to change after all of the different twists and turns the vote took this past week. The Memphis Area Transit Authority, probably the big winner in the operating budget, as Commissioner Brandon Morrison secured, with lots of Democratic votes across the aisle, $1.3 million in recurring funding for the city bus system after years of talk of some county funding of MATA. On the city side, final budget and tax rate votes coming up at the June 15th council session. At that meeting, Councilmember Martavius Jones is expected to propose a 26-cent property tax rate hike, taking the city's $2.71 rate to an even $3. Jones did not bring this up for a vote at the June 8th Budget Committee wrap-up, so no test vote here for reference, but it didn't look like anywhere near enough votes were there for at least a tax hike of that magnitude. Even some council members who said they could be open to a property tax hike under the right conditions and for the right uses argued that the timing was not right. Meanwhile, the city has a fix to the $23 million hole in its revenues when federal ARPA funds were planned to plug it. That could still be the case, but the federal guidance and, more important, the federal calculations will not be made until the end of this calendar year. And this is a measure twice, cut once situation, since if you ignore the guidance out of Washington and it turns against the city has to pay the money back. So the Strickland administration will allocate $23 million from the city's reserves or fund balance to fill the hole if it comes to be. The city did the same thing in the current fiscal year in its use of CARES Act federal funding with an even higher amount, and will end the current fiscal year on June 30th, not having to take anything from that reserve. Quite the week for Shelby County schools. The school district's Reimagine 901 plan calling for $55 million more in capital funding for each of the next 10 years for new school construction, renovation, and a major realignment of where schools are built. Denied by the Shelby County Commission. The Commission left its capital spending for SCS in the next fiscal year at $22.8 million, about 77% of the $29.7 million in total capital funding for the county's 7 public school districts. Shelby County Schools reconfiguring the plan after that to keep the new school construction, starting with the new Frazier High School. That is the most visible element of the Reimagine plan and probably the barometer for whether public sentiment ultimately gets behind the rest of the plan and the price tag. Still a question how much of the school's version of federal ARPA money will or can come into play for this. The federal funding is, after all, for one-time uses like construction projects. At the other end of the week, Shelby County Schools abruptly announcing it is ending its 7-year early childhood contract with Porter Leith when the current contract runs out at the end of this month. Porter Leith and SCS were negotiating a new agreement, and the school system says Porter Leith wanted more money. The school system claims bringing preschool early childhood education in-house will mean savings of about $3 million. Porter Leith saying it found out about this from SCS staff on a statewide conference call, along with everyone else on the call 3 weeks before the contract runs out. The agency also disputes that it wanted more, saying its contract has been going down while total Head Start grant funding that comes through the school system has increased. Porter Leith has 5 centers for preschool-age children that were part of the SCS system. Those centers remain open for enrollment outside the school system. Before the county commission got to the budget this past week, one other note, Republican Commissioner Amber Mills moving to reconsider the commission's 11-0 passage 2 weeks earlier of a resolution calling on Tennessee Governor Bill Lee to veto the law banning critical race theory from being taught in the state's public schools. That's the resolution passed as Lee was literally signing the bill into law that same afternoon in Nashville. Mills saying 2 weeks later she wanted to take back her yes vote. Democratic Commissioner Tammy Sawyer saying Republicans on the commission were feeling heat from their own party for their votes. 3 Republicans, including Mills, voted for the resolution originally. In the second vote, the resolution still passed with 8 votes, all 8 Democratic commissioners. The federal wire fraud and money laundering trial of State Senator Katrina Robinson that was to begin June 14th is delayed at least to August. The attorneys for Robinson and the 2 co-defendants, Brooke Boudreau and Katie Ayers, told the court they need more time to prepare. Robinson was charged by prosecutors in July 2020 with misapplying funds for her healthcare institute and then charged with Boudreau and Ayers this past January in another round of charges alleging they swindled someone who paid them $14,470, thinking it was tuition for the institute. Memphis Police Chief C.J. Davis takes office this coming week, and she has already named her second in command. It is Deputy Chief Don Crow. Shelby County Criminal Court Clerk Heidi Kuhn is running for re-election next year. Kuhn opening her second-term campaign this past week in East Memphis, and it comes with a criminal justice reform theme, with Kuhn pledging to do more for expungements of criminal records, including an expungement court. Kuhn also touting her office's use of a recently enacted state law that allows county clerks across the state to waive expungement fees if they so choose. Kuhn is the second incumbent to open her 2022 campaign in 2021. District Attorney General Amy Weirich was the first in May. Joining us now is Mairi Albertson, Interim Director of the Housing and Community Development Division of the City of Memphis, and we are here to talk about something you might not associate with HCD as it's known, broadband, access to digital data transmission. The division, along with the Memphis and Shelby County Division of Planning and Development, is developing what promises to be an ambitious plan to bring broadband access to large areas of the city where it currently is not part of the daily life of those communities. Mairi, what areas of the city are we talking about? And I think from our experience during the pandemic, we know it's not just one area, right?
Right, that's correct. And actually, we're in the middle of developing a citywide broadband strategic plan. So I think that we'll get that information out of the plan. One of the things that we have underway right now in the data collection process is a survey that was mailed out to a certain a small percentage of residents that our consultant is collecting the data back on, but it's all about access, the type of internet that someone has in their home or wherever they use internet, or if they don't have internet, we certainly want to identify that too. And then we also have what we call the speed test, and that's a link that someone can get to through their phone or at the library or at their home or at their work And it's a quick survey. It does ask them to identify if they do or do not have internet access. And then if they do, the type and the type of device that they use to access. And then there's a button to push for that checks the speed of someone's internet service through that. But so I think as we begin to get all that data together, we'll have a better sense of where our areas most impacted by lack of internet are.
And I think you're going to try to put this on a map, right? Because a lot of times seeing things on a map, you think of things and you see things that you might not see if you were just looking at a lot of lines of data.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Is the problem, do you think, that the infrastructure isn't there for this, or that people can't afford it, or both?
It's a combination of both. We do know that, while there may be areas that internet is accessible, that the physical infrastructure is there, but you're right. People can't afford a provider like a Comcast or an AT&T. And so one of the things we're looking at in our plan will also be alternative service providers and alternative ways of doing this, because other cities have implemented such initiatives. But yeah, it's definitely both. There are areas that could use some additional infrastructure support, and we're looking at, the dollars for that, but also just the access to the people themselves.
Right. I think that a lot of people during the pandemic and working from home have learned that while they may have Wi-Fi, that they don't necessarily have the Wi-Fi that can hold up to working from home or doing any number of different things from home, especially given the heavier use that a lot of people were seeking and were actually relying on during this last more than a year's period, right?
Right. And, we hear stories, and I think even just from colleagues and myself personally, when we were working, mostly at home, you discover that it's just not intended for more than one person to be using the internet at the same time. And with more and more services available online, which is great, especially for people who have transportation issues, that the internet service isn't there. But I'd hear, that people who have multiple children doing remote learning, and then they're working remotely. It's just, you hear horror stories about someone's not going to be able to access something.
Right. So we're talking about a system of access here that can stand up to the demands of people, for lack of a better term, putting their full weight on the system.
Right.
Mm-hmm. What is the transformation that this kind of access can mean in areas of the city where it's currently sparse or non-existent at the present time, beyond people being able to do things that they have to do or things for work?
So you mean what will it mean to have this type of improved infrastructure beyond just work and school?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think, we have a couple of pilot projects, one in the South City neighborhood that's around digital literacy and education. And there's so much available now that could enhance people's lives beyond what we mentioned. But, like telehealth, people who don't go and get checked up as much as they should, because of a number of issues, they could do that at home now. So, to be able to provide people access to healthcare with better broadband would be an asset. And also access to education opportunities to help them further, their career goals, or to identify, job opportunities. And so we're looking at how we can really help. You can give someone technology and give them access, but we also think it's important to give them the tools to realize how they can maximize the use of that technology.
Right. Even something as routine as paying a utility bill during this pandemic, I think a lot of people who throughout their lives and maybe as children had seen their parents go to pay the monthly utility bill at one of the light, gas, and water customer service centers. A lot of people realize you don't have to do that you can pay it online, or you can go to a kiosk someplace. You don't need to go to a counter where there's a person waiting for you to pay your bill.
Exactly. So those kinds of things that save people time, transportation expenses, all those things are definitely assets. And then another big one that just popped into my mind was having your groceries delivered. If, that's an opportunity where you live, if, there's places, the food deserts we hear about a lot now, that you could get online, order groceries, and not have to worry about how you're going to get to a grocery store in order to do that.
Mm-hmm. Does this change then our approach to those problems, like public transportation and like the existence of food deserts, do you think?
I think it certainly provides a good alternative to that issue, where you don't physically have to go somewhere. Certainly it's an amenity to have access to those services physically, but accessing them, having the ability to access them over the internet would be of great benefit to a number of people who are just going to have barriers otherwise getting there physically.
Mm-hmm. I think in the briefing that you and John Zena from Planning and Development did for the City Council, I heard some mention of a pilot or trial program in Soulsville as well.
That's correct. We did sort of a mini plan for Soulsville broadband with the goal in mind on that project was to look to how we could deliver low-cost broadband service in Soulsville. And so the pilot was really to set a vision for a collaboration between the institutions in Soulsville, like Lemoyne College, Soulsville USA, some of the other key institutions, and see how we can work together to improve broadband availability for the neighborhood. And then we also thought that it could serve as a model that we can scale to other areas of the city to do similar things. There's also a pilot project in the Klondike Smoky City area as well, with one apartment building where we've been able to provide just that last piece of infrastructure from, the pole to the actual apartment units to give that service to the tenants of that apartment community.
Right. So as you develop a look at the city as a whole, along with these trial programs or pilot projects, I hesitate to use the word pilot because these days pilot means payments in lieu of taxes.
Right.
Sorry, but at any rate, so you'll have some of what the data tells you, and you'll also have some practical experience on the ground in these three areas, right?
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. How much does this cost starting out, and does any of it involve the Federal American Rescue Plan Act money?
Yes, and really, you mentioned at the beginning, like you may not think of housing and community development being in the broadband area, and I'm about as surprised at that as anybody. But we received an allocation of funding through HUD through the CARES Act. And so in addition to our regular allocation of community development block grant funds, we received a CARES Act allocation to respond to the pandemic. And so some, in our guidance that we received, some of it was, hey, you can use community development block grant funds for infrastructure improvements, which include broadband and HUD's eye. So we acknowledge and we recognize that is a big need in the community. And so we allocated some of the dollars to the, we'll call it the model project in South City. And we've allocated dollars for the development of the citywide strategic plan around broadband. And then we've also allocated dollars to implement the recommendations that came out of the Soulsville model project. So with that project, we had a few alternatives, and they ranged. we had alternatives that ranged in cost from, because we did ask our consultant to think of a few alternatives. So it ranges around from about, I think, just fiber connecting the anchor institutions around 100,000 to an alternative where fiber connects throughout a pretty large area within Soulsville, connecting over 1,200 residences and businesses. And then the anchor institutions also, that was kind of the Cadillac in the scenario. And it's around 2.5 million with a middle ground interim step of about $1 million.
Okay.
So there are alternatives, which is good. And we're just evaluating what would get us the biggest with the dollars that we have available.
And you mentioned fiber. Is this primarily optical fiber that we're talking about, or in some of the other options that you have you kind of gone a different way with it?
We're primarily looking at fiber.
Okay. All right. This also segues with the Memphis 3.0 plan, the city's long-term land use and development plan, in which every part of the city has some kind of what are called anchors or centers of activity that could be a jumping off point for private investment, be it commercial, residential, or community related exclusively. How does the broadband plan that's being assembled here segue with 3.0?
So in addition to being in line with 3.0, we also wanted it to be in line with the Smart Memphis plan that Director Zena talked about at the council briefing. But the way that we're looking at it is we want this plan to align with 3.0 and really embody the core around 3.0, the build up, not out. So we are looking at primarily, target neighborhoods of Memphis that would be identified through the plan, and in line with 3.0, kind of look at how we can work in these anchors and use this as a way to provide job growth and also incentives for new businesses to locate in these areas, as well as just the short-term recovery from the pandemic. But we also think that it'll help promote density in a residential sense. So bring in, density, vibrancy, and a strong economic resilience for Memphis is a real opportunity through this planning effort.
Sure, because so much of the discussion about density in residential areas has primarily focused on how you can make some kind of commercial development, like a store or a shop or some kind of retail center, how you can make that pencil out for a private developer to come in. Broadband, it seems, kind of changes that equation, or at least add some possibilities to it, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And it could mean that your retail is somewhere else. The things where people get the things they need daily are maybe not in that area. That's
true, and again, some retail goods and services could be accessed through the availability of broadband. It allows it opens up whole new doors for thinking about density in a different way.
Right. So how long until you have a map and a plan, and as I understand it, a coordinator to kind of oversee making sure that the plan keeps moving? How long until you have that?
So we, and right now the timeline is that we would have a comprehensive report available in September of this year. Like many things that could fluctuate and maybe move a month or two, but it will definitely be before the end of the calendar year. And with regard to, we are hiring a senior manager for overseeing our broadband efforts for the city of Memphis. And the job is currently posted on the city's job postings website. We are also advertising that through a number of national organizations for, say, societies for engineers and other related, fields that would be ideal for a person, skills that a person would have for this position. So we'll keep it open a little longer than we may keep another job open, but I would think that it'll close early July, and then we'll start the selection and interview process right shortly after that.
Right. This is unique for the city of Memphis, for any of our local governments. Is this being done in other cities that you know of?
It is. And, we're working with a firm that has expertise in the field. It's CTC Engineering and Technology. And they work in other cities around the country. And then when we were looking to post a position, because a position would be new to us, we did look around and see what other cities are doing and who has staff. And we found some really great job descriptions through our research. So it is happening in other cities. I think it's still, largely new for everybody, but for obvious reasons, it's definitely becoming a pretty normal thing.
Sure. And the network for this, is that something the city would attempt to do, or is this about trying to bring in private firms and kind of go, look, this area, people in this area don't make a lot of money, so we don't need a really expensive plan for it. But is it the city driving the bus in terms of operating the broadband service, or is it the city overseeing private companies that do this?
What we envision is that, we would issue have some sort of competitive process to attract private internet service providers. I would imagine that it would be more than one. Some specialize in providing low cost services, while others are more market driven. But we would definitely not oversee that ourselves. We would be working with the experts in the private service provider, the internet service provider industry to do that. And our consultant, the team at CTC Technology and Energy, also have a great, they're giving us great suggestions on how to get the best bang for our buck there for our citizens.
Right. Because right now, someone living in any part of the city could try to have internet access, Wi-Fi or something like that, and they could probably get it at whatever price it is out there, or it might be limited in the areas that they live in because of infrastructure. So it's out there. It's just a question of, is it reliable? Is it cost effective for people here on the ground, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we will look forward to see how this continues to roll out. We've been talking with Mairi Albertson, Interim Director of Memphis Housing and Community Development. This week on WKNO's Behind the Headlines, a reporters roundtable with Toby Sells of the Memphis Flyer, our first show back in the studios of WKNO in more than a year, back at the table and under the lights and very little Zoom withdrawal. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. You can subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Natalie Van Gundy.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.